Hi, this is our fourth ScentTech Talks series, and today I will speak with Rachel Herz. But before our conversation, I would like to remind you that this ScentTech Talks is a part of the project called Scent Recorder to improve emotional well-being, which is supported by Latvia via Latvian Investment and Development Agency and Norway via Norway Grants. So, hi, Rachel.
Hi, Sandris. Very nice to be here.
Can you just a little bit introduce yourself?
Sure. I am a neuroscientist. I have been studying the sense of smell for over 30 years and work in a variety of different domains. I work in industry, I work in academia, I do all kinds of different sorts of things. I teach as well, and I write books. So I have lots of things that I'm involved with, but everything pretty much centers on the sense of smell, and especially the psychological science behind the sense of smell and how smells can influence our behavior, our thoughts, our emotions, and basically all aspects of daily life.
And you are a scientist. What are, to your mind, what are significant, the most significant discoveries about scent? What scientists discovered so far?
Well, I mean, as you may know, the sense of smell is still relatively enigmatic in that compared to what we know about our other senses, the full code for how things go from volatile chemicals that we are inhaling then get translated into sensory percepts and then get translated further into our brain, into conscious perceptions of smell, that is still not 100% realized and understood. So that is something that makes smell a very interesting sensory system, one of the many things that makes smell such an interesting sensory system to research. And there are a lot of unique features about the sense of smell that are not like any of our other sensory systems. So it's there's many discoveries. I mean, actually right now, I think we are really in a explosion, kind of an enlightenment period, as it were, for research on the sense of smell. And much more is happening now than ever has happened before. And some of the things that are really exciting is relating how it is that these volatile chemicals go from floating through the air to being then interpreted by our brain is very, very interesting, and a lot more is happening along those lines. But then the key that I think is really critical to this is it's not just that the chemical is being analyzed and coded, but the response that then the individual experiences as a function of the scent. So it's not a straightforward linear kind of relationship where there's a certain, for example, frequency of electromagnetic radiation and your eye detects it and it's the color red. In smell, it's much more complicated, much more nuanced, and much more individualistic.
And you said, right, that there is some increasing interest and increasing research of scents only this century, right? Only recent years. Why it's so?
Well, I mean, it's not quite this century, but definitely the explosion has taken place in this century. Well, first of all, in the last century, in 1990, the sort of code for understanding the genetics of the olfactory sensory system was discovered by Linda Buck and Richard Axel. And they had a very famous paper in the journal Cell, and then they received a Nobel Prize actually in 2004 for this discovery. So that was really the catalyst, this paper, this research in 1990 that then led to this explosion of research. And for one reason was that now there was something that people who were, let's say, in other fields of science, for instance, vision or other kinds of, not even sensory systems, saw that they could make a career in olfaction by looking at things from a molecular and a biochemical perspective, because before that, it really wasn't known how to start to address things at the genetic level. So many scientists then moved from where they were researching originally to work on the sense of smell. And then, of course, what really drives all advances in science is funding. So research organizations, research funding sources started to put more money into understanding the sense of smell. And so along with that, then more and more work has actually emerged. Now, unfortunately, there has not been nearly as much research kind of in parallel to the biochemical and the genetic work on the more pure psychological behavioral end of the spectrum, because that has still, only been moving relatively slowly. And starting, probably in the 1960s with Trygg Engen's work. So he is a famous Norwegian scientist who was actually working at Brown University and is really the father of the psychological study of smell. And I had the privilege to get to know him and work with him a little bit. He is unfortunately no longer with us, but he really started the psychological study of smell. But unfortunately, it's moving, but it hasn't moved with the same speed and intensity as the biochemistry and the genetics side of studying smell has.
And what scientists would like to discover, right, to unlock what knowledge still is missing?
So I think that where the biggest science questions are right now is how do we really go from interpreting, here's a chemical, here's how it's going to be interpreted by the brain, and this is the response it's going to elicit. But as I said, the reason why this equation is so difficult to solve is because it is not hard and fast, straightforward, the way, for instance, in hearing, certain frequencies of sound waves are clearly detected, as a particular pitch or note, and then the brain responds accordingly. And similarly, in vision, there's a very direct relationship between the stimulus and the response. And in olfaction, there is not such a clear relationship. And it's also hard to work with humans to figure that out. And you can't use animal models with the same kind of reliability, because what a mouse responds to in terms of a chemical is not necessarily how a human is going to respond, nor is one human going to respond the same way as another. So the fact that there is this high degree of individual variation in not just the interpretation of the percepts, but actually also in the direct perception itself. Because one of the things that's really fascinating about the sense of smell is everyone actually has a unique nose. And what I mean by that is that the specific receptors that are expressed in the olfactory epithelium, which is where the olfactory sensory neurons are, is actually ever so slightly different for every single person, unless potentially if you have an identical twin, it's the same, but maybe epigenetics also changes that. But what this means is that what we are perceiving is not identical across individuals. Primarily in terms of the intensity of the perception is probably where this is most noted, but it's also in direct perception itself. And this is something that people are maybe familiar with if they've heard of something called specific anosmia. So that is to say that I have a normal sense of smell, but there's one chemical I can't detect. And what the most common one is to a musk chemical, androstenedione, that people either can't detect at all, or they detect it as a sweet floral scent, or other people detect it as kind of a sweaty, urinous kind of scent. So, and this has to do with whether or not they have the receptor for detecting it and what kind of receptor they have that's expressed that's doing the detection. So that's, an example of how across the board, we're all detecting things ever so slightly differently. And then downstream from that, there's my own personal level of interpretation of what that scent is. And then my interpretation of what that scent is, that meaning, is going to determine my response. So if I think that so regardless of how I perceive it, if I think that it's someone bringing me a bouquet of roses, that's going to be a completely different response than I have if I'm thinking that I've just picked up a sweaty sock. So regardless of how I'm interpreting a scent, because of how I'm interpreting a scent, regardless in a way of what the chemical is per se, that is where sort of the final code of execution comes from, because then my behavior is going to be as a function of what I've interpreted the scent to be. And because there's such a lack of clear-cut connection between the chemical and the response for so many reasons, like I've just mentioned a few, that it makes it extremely difficult. And one other thing to say that makes it even more difficult is that it's almost never the case that you're only experiencing one chemical at a time. So it's not that I'm, only experiencing this one particular chemical and nothing else is in the mix. Unlike, for instance, if I'm looking at something, let's say I'm looking at a door and the door is a certain color, let's say it's red. I'm not also seeing blue and green and all kinds of different iridescent colors all at the same time. Well, in olfaction, it's the same kind of idea that I'm experiencing all kinds of smells all at the same time. And some of those are going to be rising to the surface and going to be perceived as much more intense. But every different blend is going to lead to a different kind of synthetic interpretation, because the sense of smell is primarily synthetic. That is to say, the whole is not the same as the sum of the parts. And so whatever the mixture is going to lead to a specific percept. And I cannot really parse out the specifics of that percept, except for maybe, 2, 3, 4 very, very strong odorants, if that's what's in the mix, but even potentially fewer than that. Usually it's just a complex blend. And I'm not really sure of what the chemicals that are the constituents are, not to mention that depending upon the blend, I can be smelling two things that to me smell identical, but the blend of chemicals is actually totally different. So all these kinds of things make this sort of direct code extremely difficult. And nevertheless, that's I think one of the goals right now is to try to figure out how to simplify that moving forward, to sort of get at least kind of an alphabet or heuristic that can be used scientifically moving forward, especially, for example, in the case of machine learning.
And looking on scent, what is the role of scents in human perception?
Well, the role of scent is much bigger than I think most people realize. Unfortunately, most people don't recognize how much the sense of smell is giving to them unless they have the misfortune to lose it. And one of the things that has happened over the last 2 years as a function of the COVID-19 pandemic is that many, many more people than ever before have at least had a transient experience with anosmia, with not being able to smell. And it's in this window that people have recognized, oh my goodness, I thought maybe the sense of smell was involved with food, or maybe it helped me detect danger, but actually it is involved with absolutely everything that we experience, from our social relationships, our emotional relationships, our sense of self, our connection to our past, our connection to our place in the world around us. It really kind of colors all of our interactions and all of our experiences. But because smells are invisible, and we are such visually oriented creatures, as well as being very oriented towards information, I need to know what this is. So if I hear something or I see something, it tells me what it is. With scent, because of the fact that I can't see things, unless I see, fumes coming up from the pot, so I know exactly it's coming from there, or I've just stuck my nose into a rose, so I know the scent is coming from there. The fact that things are invisible when it comes to smell means that our attention is not drawn to smell the way it is with, for instance, the sense of hearing or vision. And because of that lack of kind of visual attention or cognitive attention, we, for the most part, discount how involved the sense of smell is. But really, it is like the background of everything that we're experiencing all the time.
And did you notice about yourself some interesting things? What scents and scenting brings to you?
Well, I mean, I am very influenced by smell, and I really like smells, obviously, and I think I have a relatively good sense of smell. But because of what I know about how smell is involved in my emotional life and my cognitive life and so forth, and my memories in particular, I sometimes do things to kind of engineer, in a way, maybe a little bit of what your Scent Camera is doing, in the sense that I like, for instance, if I'm going on a special vacation that to a place I've never been to before, what I will do is, let's say, get a fragrance, buy a new perfume, for instance, I've never worn before, I've never used before, and only wear it during this trip. So that when I come back and then I smell that fragrance again, it'll remind me specifically of my time in this particular location and the things that happen, let's say, during the course of that week. So I kind of create my own scent memory tags for special events when I know that they're going to happen. So I can kind of engineer this ahead of time. And then certainly from the point of view of people that are important to me, carrying or having a perfume bottle from someone who's special and being able to smell that, if I'm missing them and so forth. So kind of deliberately using scents to conjure the past when I know specifically what is, what I want to do. But apart from that, I definitely pay attention as much as I can to the smells around me to try to use that to both enrich my current experience and also sort of figure out what is going on. Like sort of, I'm my own personal experiment. So when I think about what is something that I'm interested in or what will be something that I can try to figure out with respect to the sense of smell, I try to kind of do the introspective, personal experiment of what is it that I'm experiencing? What is this doing for me? What is it eliciting and why? And so kind of trying to think about it probably more than the average person in terms of how it dictates what is going on in my life and in my brain.
And if humanity needs the medium for scent, similar like we have photo camera for visuals or audio recorder for sounds, if you think that we need that the humanity needs that medium for scents, then why?
Well, I think that it would be very exciting and interesting to be able to have a catalog of the scents that you've tracked, in different experiences and have different specific meanings in different aspects of your life. Sort of like having this recorder for memories that are tagged by smells. So that if I were to, sniff something that's going to remind me then, oh, that came from when I was in that particular forest or on that particular vacation or with that specific person. So then I can have this memory experience connected to that. And one of the things that I've been working on, for my career in olfaction is how memories triggered by smells are especially evocative and emotional, much more so than any of our other sensory experiences. And so to really capture the kind of visceral, emotional, back there and then in that moment kind of feeling, having a smell as the tag for a memory is really unique from the point of view of any kind of memory that we can have in any other way. So I think that it would be really fun for people to be able to sort of have this direct nostalgia that they can evoke from having a catalog of scents that then they can turn to and sniff when they need to. One of the things, though, that I'm always cautioning everybody about when they get all excited about using a scent for reimagining or re-experiencing a past emotion or a past memory is that the more you smell something, the more it disappears. So that is to say, if you keep on sniffing that favorite scent because you want to remember and feel whatever it was, it starts to become less and less detectable. And that's actually due to a biochemical system that's taking place in your nose, that the actual interaction between the cells and the chemicals that are eliciting that scent stop being activated. And then if you actually keep returning to the same scent over and over in time, another phenomenon starts to take place. In addition to this sensory biochemical event, there's more of a cognitive event that you sort of habituate out and you sort of don't really get that same scent perception anymore. It's like if you worked in a bakery, for example, every day you walk into the bakery, the first couple of weeks maybe that you work there, you can smell the bakery when you walk in. But after time of working there every day, you actually don't even hardly get that at all. And the same, so that's the habituation, the long-term effect. And the short-term effect is if anybody walks into a bakery and they smell, the cakes and the breads and the so forth, and it smells so good, you're standing in the bakery for 5 minutes or so, and then you can't smell the bakery anymore. And that's what the short-term adaptation, more physiological event is. So in both those situations, you lose being able to detect the scent. And if you lose the detection, you lose the consequence. So I'm always, with myself, and also telling people that, if you have a special scent, only sniff it sparingly, if you want it to evoke that particular special occasion or emotion or memory. So that's it's good if you have, by the way, a catalog of different scents that you can go to that maybe are all connected to the same emotion or the same memory situation, so that there could be more than one scent that can bring you back there. You're less likely to have this desensitization and not be able to get back to it. So that would be one way of solving this problem.
Yes, very interesting. And where you can see the use cases, right? One is individual memory, right? What could be else? It could be use art, education, or scientists it could use.
Yes, well, I mean, it's really interesting how scent could be used as a tag for learning and memory, because, I mean, obviously they're two sides of the same coin. So in order to have the scent be connected to a memory, it has to be involved in the learning process as well. And it's definitely the case that the scent that's involved in learning whatever information it might be will have an impact on that information that's being learned. And there's different aspects of how that could happen. So for instance, if the scent is potentially conceptually congruent with the information. So, for instance, if you were cooking and the scents were of specific spices or herbs and so forth, or maybe it actually makes a better case for learning if they're very different, because your attention is being more brought to them. So saliency is another important factor, and distinctiveness. Those two pieces together are things that I've worked on with respect to the learning piece. So all of this really boils down to attention, and being able to have your attention drawn to the scent and the connection that it's making to the particular moment and experience. But definitely, I mean, I've actually done research where people have to learn a list of words, so kind of like a test type of situation, and then they do so in the presence of a specific scent, and then their memory for that information is tested either with that scent or a different scent or no scent. And also in this initial equation of learning, whether or not the individual is in an emotionally heightened state. And being in an emotionally heightened state during the acquisition process actually makes the binding between the chemical scent and the information even stronger, so that then when you smell the scent again, you are brought back to that information and that time and everything else much more intensely, and you actually remember more. So there's all kinds of ways this can be used. I mean, one of the other things besides sort of kind of straightforward studying for a test, and if you're like anxious and nervous studying for the test and you have a certain scent with you, and you also don't want that smell to be something that you already know or connected to another subject that you're also learning. So for instance, a student studying for their geography exam should have a very specific scent and not use the same one as for their chemistry or their psychology exam. But in any case, so they use that scent again to help them remember the information. That could be one thing. But then it can also be used, for instance, in museums and installations where you have artwork where there's not just the visual, but there's potentially also an olfactory component to conjure a scene. And there's already been many museum and art installations using scent to kind of create a space, to create a sensation, to create an experience, which is really what art is doing all the time. So, I think I could go on and on. There's whole huge domains. I mean, of course, entertainment being another one. This has sort of been a holy grail for quite a long time, from the beginning of trying to have, those scratch and sniff cards in movies, and, that being a failure. But, there's all kinds of future iterations where scent can be involved. I mean, virtual reality being a prime example, which is something that is even happening now.
And imagine, right, after 3 or 5 years, right, there will be in the market a scent camera. I hope so. Or I will just give you as a present, right? What would be the first scent which you would like to record?
Well, that's a very good question. You have to ask me in 5 years when you give me the camera, because it'll be depending upon what's going on in my life at that time. So I can't answer that right now, unfortunately. I know you want me to answer something, but I really would have to figure out maybe what I'm missing, what I want to have recorded, maybe where I am. Certainly, I'd want to record in general, smells that are going to bring me back to special people, special places, special times. So those are the things that would be most important to me. And then, of course, also I have a few favorite scents in general that I would want to make sure that I could smell. However, something that's interesting about favorite scents. So for instance, if I were to pick one example and I said, let's say the floral scent of lilac that I like a lot. One of the special things about lilac being a really special smell is that lilac only blooms for a short period in the year. So it's really only available very briefly. And that's part of what makes it special. So if I had my favorite smell available, all the time, it wouldn't be the same thing. So in a way, it's very context dependent, situationally dependent, and you want to keep things special as opposed to, getting to be, I just get that all the time, lilac chocolate, whatever, they're not interesting to me anymore. So you want to keep the special scents alive by using them sparingly and only having them occasionally.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for this talk.
Thank you very much for having me.